Hey, everybody. John Siefert here with Acceleration Economy. Welcome to the Acceleration Economy Growth Swarm, a podcast program where we get a few folks together to really talk about how we can swarm around big ideas that enable growth for an organization. I am joined by my co-host for this program, Bob Evans, who is the founder of CloudWars, co-founder of the Acceleration Economy, Tony Uphoff, who is formerly CEO of ThomasNet, now one of our Acceleration Economy analysts and a three-time CEO, Scott Vaughan, who is an Acceleration Economy analyst and three-time CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, who is leading a lot of our coverage around growth acceleration and growth opportunities for executives in the C-suite. Gentlemen, I was hoping to get us together today to swarm around the concept of time. And you know, boy, it's something we all wish we had more of. It's all something we feel like we don't have enough of. And it's all something that we're looking for a better return on, right? A return on our time that we're investing in things. As executives, a number of us find ourselves moving from meeting to meeting to meeting, right? In so many of our days, whilst at the same time, the pressure is on us to be reimagining business models, reimagining ideas, determining new ways to dazzle customers and the like. However, if we're just jumping from meeting to meeting, that's pretty hard to do. Today, we're going to swarm on this topic. Bob, would love to hand things over to you to kickstart us a little bit.
Oh, John, thank you. And I'm honored to be among this illustrious group. The thing you mentioned about time, John, it's fascinating, right? You know, how many times have all of us heard the term digital transformation over the past 3-4 years? And the term's been beaten to death, but the concept is valid. The other thing that happens, though, is companies come through this transformation, they're quite different on the other end. And I think one of the big new priorities for leaders these days has to be one about culture, not just doing what we did before a little bit better, but doing things in an entirely new way. And John, I think it's a terrible idea if a leader allows herself or himself to get trapped into the tyranny of a schedule that has you going back to back. People around the organizations, they've never done the sort of things we're doing right now and the things that we're asking them to do. And I think it's not, I don't mean management by walking around, but management by presence, by involvement, by engagement, I think has to be the new thing, instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't go talk to the employees because I was trapped in Zoom calls. I think that's a flimsy and lazy excuse.
Flimsy and lazy is one heck of a good way to say it. And I think it becomes incumbent upon leaders inside organizations, no matter what that role is, quite frankly, to recognize those things and act on them as opposed to becoming victims of them, right? Because so many times you hear somebody go, gosh, I was so busy today. I was up at this time. I was up at that time. I found myself doing it in the past, right? And then I'll actually scold myself and say, oh gosh, John, that's not what you ought to be doing, you know? So Scotty, how do we try to get away from that environment, right? How do we try to maximize our time and the time that we're investing?
Yeah, Bob hit on culture, and I think that's such an important part, because you feel the pressure to be on back to back, because all these things do need to happen, and we don't have that same kind of walking around the office interaction that we've had. And once you get into these patterns, it becomes the culture. So I think the first thing you do is really lead by example and establish some guidelines and talk about it. Don't hide it or only have it in management meetings, but put it out there that this has to change if we're going to unlock our minds. There's a reason, you know, one of the big contributors to the Great Resignation has been sitting on Zoom calls from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. and your mind burns out and your creativity's gone. And so culture is I think one of the key things to get it jump started, to set that right tone, leading by example. And then the other point is really maybe offering some resources about time management, about time planning available to your crew. And proactively bring them in. And then the irony is, I've got to make a meeting time to go to the time management course. I realize that, but make that fun and interactive. Make that an interesting way to look at it. And my last comment is, I worked with a coach, and they said, you know what 2,000 hours is? I had no idea. 2,000 hours is the average amount of time the business professional has during the year. So you better use it wisely. And that 2,000 hours can keep breaking down.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. I've never thought about that 2,000 hours sort of thing. I don't know if anybody else has here, because it seems like instead of thinking of 2,000 hours, we're thinking, how do we take that 2,000 hours and make it 2,500, right? Or how do we make it 2,600 or whatever to squeeze a little bit more in? That point of leading by example, boy, that's a much easier said than done sort of scenario for an executive. I found myself actually organizing into my own calendar blocked off times that I just call heads down, right? Or I call it thinking or something like that in my calendar, so that I'm forcing myself to actually spend time doing that sort of stuff, as opposed to being reactive in everything that I'm doing. Tony, I've heard you talk about something back in the day that you used to call the sneaker net, right? Where it was, hey, making sure that you're getting the time to walk around and talk to people and engage with people, but in a meaningful way, not just in a, hey, how are you sort of way. In a virtual world, in a work from anywhere world, how do some of those things still remain alive in your culture?
Yeah, I think it is so hard. And I double down on Bob's point on culture and Scott's commentary on it. As similar to all of you, I've lost count of how many conversations over the last 3 months I've had with senior executives and how quickly this topic comes up. And I think folks are struggling a little bit. And there's probably a few reasons, John, right? So one is there was a false level of productivity in the early days of remote work, in that I could start at 6 in the morning and end at 6 at night. And I could literally have 20 or 30 meetings during the course of a day, which would be very hard to do physically. And even, geographically, I could move around the country. It was kind of, wow, this is great. But then I think, John, to your point, you start to realize when you, go back and look at your week. Everybody has their own systems. Scott mentioned the need to return to time management. As he was saying that, I was realizing how right he was. Not because time management is a new concept, but because how we manage time is being disrupted by technology. And I think that's a really key thing right now, that ability to kind of stop and say, have I been productive? And so I find myself in this era kind of doing something I used to do early in my career, John, where I used to go back and on Friday afternoon, I would take an hour and look at each meeting I had and ask myself an honest question: did I have impact? And then use that as an assessment tool of, kind of look at the quadrant and people, product, process, right? Am I spending time in the right areas for the business? But also, am I lulling myself into a false satisfaction where, I want to show I'm productive. I want to show I'm having more meetings than anybody, early on, and I see you guys smiling, early on in a career, I remember there was this badge of honor of how many air miles you flew, right? How little sleep you got, but nobody ever asked you about your productivity. Nobody actually asked you about the return on that time. So John, long-winded way back to your point, I think there's two things that I find myself being very intentional about. One is really looking at the schedule of my day and my week, and where necessary, kind of adjusting and saying, hey, do I need to just have that touch base meeting? Could that just be an email? And not therefore I don't want to be with that person, but really being a little bit more thoughtful, as opposed to saying, oh, Sunday night, I feel great because I've got a jam schedule this next week. So now I don't really have to think. I just do, right? I think there's that. I think the other aspect about it is, and boy, I haven't found a really good solution to this yet. As the world's starting to open up, I find myself scheduling time to get together with people. And that's not necessarily in an office. It could be, recently Scott and I, got together for dinner. I came out to Arizona and a group of us got together for a day and a half of meetings. I had a business dinner last night. It's so easy to just schedule, a ton of these video calls. I think finding those opportunities. The other thing I've been looking to do, John, is have a looser agenda for some of the calls, meaning just make them touch base calls. just check in with somebody. Yeah, it's somebody you're working with or you want to work with, but having a little bit of a looser agenda. And what I'm finding is it doesn't replicate the sneaker net. The ability to walk around and happen to bump into somebody near the coffee machine or whatever it might be. But I think what happens is if you do that with a little bit of frequency, people start to be a little looser in their thinking. And that's where good ideas come from.
I don't know, Tony. I mean, some of the counter, that feels right to me. But when you say that, everybody don't have a meeting unless you have a purpose and an agenda. So how do you wrestle with those two things? Those are like, counter.
Yeah, and I think, Scott, I think we have to, I'd go back to the point that you and Bob brought up with is one of culture. At the end of the day, culture is really, in my opinion, culture is about how the work gets done in this company. It's not some mystical thing. It's not some, secret tattoo and handshake nonsense. It really is, how does the work get done? And if we agree we have the ability to challenge each other and say, hey, this meeting isn't worth my time, or that meeting wasn't productive, or I don't need to be in that meeting. And we've built up enough trust where, we can say that to each other. Because to your point too, Scott, boy, in the wrong hands, what I was describing could be way too loose. And now it's kind of like the online happy hour stuff that happened. And after the second one of those I hope I'm not offending any of our listeners with this, but about the second one of those you're like, oh man, I just can't do another one of these forced kind of happy hours where you're all sitting there staring at a computer screen, right?
Yeah, if this is happy, I don't want to see bored. Yeah, guys, John, if I could toss one other thing in, this might be something that everybody in every decade for the last 100 years has felt, but we also have this very real dynamic, I think, of, the future is coming at us faster than ever before, right? New product cycles are much shorter. Company organizational changes are faster. Customers are making decisions faster on things than ever before. Your customers, your prospects expect information, insights, new ideas quicker and all that. So in a more deliberate time, we could afford to do some of these things, have meetings, and maybe they weren't all crackerjack, but, hey, we got some stuff done. We moved the ball forward, all those old cliches that represent incrementalism. And I just think today, leaders and organizations have to, get the incrementalism sniffer out, find it, beat it to death with a sledgehammer, and eliminate every chance of that. And I don't know what exactly the opposite of incrementalism is, but dynamism, something like that, and have that become a cultural thing in the company where people feel empowered, if you will, to take action, to do things, to move it forward, to be involved, and to build that pace of, acceleration, economy, vitality into their companies.
I think that is that's a flag in the ground sort of statement, Bob, right? That I think is very representative of progressive organizations today, as opposed to companies that are sort of comfortable doing stuff the way it always was. There's two little things that I want to mention off of some of the comments that were made. About 4 years ago, I did a presentation in front of a bunch of people, and I created this thing called an activity spectrum. Right. And it was reactive, active, and proactive. And there was a bunch of people in the room, but I said, hey, plot yourself on this chart, right? Plot yourself on this spectrum. How much of your time is spent reactive, how much time is spent active, and how much time is spent proactive? And of course, that made people ask questions, right? Well, how do you define this? And how do you define active and that kind of thing? And I said, well, reactive is you are responding to something else, either that the market is making you respond to, or a customer is making you respond to, or a colleague. Active is when you're collaborating with somebody. So you're actively creating something with a colleague or a partner or a customer or what have you. And then proactive is you're actually taking that time to look out the window and think about where things are going and why they're going that direction and what you can do about it and how you can impact those things. In a nutshell, right, what folks came back with was 60 to 70% reactive. 60 to 70% reactive. Between 15 and 25% active, and the remaining 5 to 10% was proactive, in an average day, an average week kind of a thing.
That feel right to you, John, that number? I mean, what do you have targets or?
Yeah, well, I started to build targets off of that, Scotty, for myself, because there were some times where my week was spent 80% reactively, right? 17% actively, where I thought I was really accomplishing something. And then the 3% active was when I was like going for a run and I was by myself and I was thinking about something, So what I've really been trying to do is say, hey, about half of my week is probably always going to be reactively working on something that is impacting the business or impacting us. How can I then spend 25% of my time to 30% of my time actively collaborating with people to come up with new ideas and approaches to solve problems and decrease complexity and those sorts of things? But then how can I discipline myself to make sure that at least 20% of my week, at least 15 to 20%, I guess it is these days, is spent really thinking about how I can proactively come up with ideas?
John, I wonder, as you're saying this, and I think it's so smart. My seminal Bible on this was the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and Stephen Covey wrote the quadrants. You're talking of visualizing those quadrants, and I still revisit that book as a way of looking at things. I wonder though, the 4 of us have been senior executives longer than we weren't, and I wonder if part of this, and again, I hate to keep hitting the gong of culture, is creating an environment where it's almost you give people the permission and the safety to really start to make those types of decisions. One of the diagnostic things that I oftentimes give young leaders or managers is help them kind of look at things, but I'll ask them, if you had an extra hour in the day, by magic, there's 25 hours now in the day, what would you use it on as it relates to business? What would you do with that one single hour? And, once you get past the kind of, goofing around about it and you look at it, right, oftentimes what they'd mention would be around things that have big impact, big growth, big, dynamism, right? As opposed to incrementalism, going back to Bob's point. And I'm not suggesting that therefore that's the diagnostic, but I wonder if there's a broader theme emerging here that we need to make sure in the organizations that we run that we proactively, to use the expression, provide that safety, that proposition. What did Google? It's the 20% flex time. Their ship it days at other companies. All kinds of different things that this goes on. I'm not necessarily proposing that, but I think going back to Scott's point of kind of redefining time management in an era where it is fueled by technology. How do we start to think about that?
I'm sure there's an app for that somewhere, Tony. Come on now. We had the day planner, right?
Exactly.
Planner.
Exactly.
That's all I could visualize. Sorry for the out of scope, maybe out of age reference. But then I thought honestly about an app and trying to, like we do our sleep and our health, use our smartphone to try to get more time management. But one of the things that really hit me when you guys were talking about this, so is the connection you actually had in the culture, in the safety to be able to do this. Some companies have gone to no meetings Fridays, no meetings Wednesday. That never felt quite right to me because that takes out of the control and empowerment of the people. And it's just too blanket of a statement. Business, to Bob's point, business, customers, the industry you compete in, your life with family and appointments and soccer practice or whatever, it doesn't work that way. So I love your idea about creating the culture that has a safety environment and then maybe trying to find a couple of tools to help us do this. But most importantly, raise the visibility of the issue, to John's point, being able to help people go back and map some of their activity and get that a little bit more in balance. And it's just a thought.
I love the point. And I bet there is an app for it. We'll have to, if we find one, we'll have to put it in the show notes for people, right? I think there's a little topic I'd like to wrap this on. I'd like everybody's thoughts on how you have thought about this as a senior leader. It's I like the points of culture. I like the points of that freedom. I also think it's the greatest way to earn freedom, right? In some of this cultural kind of environment is to show you know how to do it, right? To show you know how to manage your time and those sorts of things. One of the things that I've spent a fair bit of time talking to folks about is trying to recognize the difference between activity and progress inside your day, right? Because some people who are really, really active, to the earlier point of them jumping from that meeting to this meeting to this meeting to this meeting, and then when how much did you change stuff? Well, I didn't change stuff a whole bunch, but golly, I was super busy. Checking the boxes, Scott, exactly. And then you've got other things where, boy, maybe it takes less time to do something, but boy, you really made a lot of progress with it, right? To Tony's earlier point of, a few of us here in Arizona, just a few days ago, gosh, it wasn't a 5-day meeting or a 4-day meeting. It was just a 5-6 hours, right, of being together. But gosh, we really came up with some pretty amazing ideas and concepts that can progress the business further. How do you all think about this as a leader in an organization, but then for your teams as well? Maybe Scotty, starting with you.
Yeah, I think, John, like every leader does, you have the North Star and the mission and the vision and the values and the culture. That has to be set. And that compass will help hopefully guide in the empowerment and the things you talked about. But I think making this conversation very visible about what are the key initiatives, because you have to make bets. You have to prioritize your time. You have to prioritize what you work on. To Bob's point, if your priorities are around incrementalism, which I love that thinking, that word, not the idea of it, but almost making it feel uncomfortable to you. Like, yeah. I'm pissed when I hear that word. Like, that's an incremental move, or that's, my time is being spent on a bunch of tactics. And there's moments you have to do that. But if you look at the totality of the list and its tactics and checking the list and feeling good about getting things done, that's not going to progress. So that priorities that's communicated regularly. Scott Dorsey, founder of ExactTarget, now the High Alpha Fund and Studios, he published a book on his entire time as CEO of ExactTarget. And it was every Friday, he published an update on the market, the business, the priorities, and what the leadership was working on and thinking about. And it's available out there. He was a main investor in one of the companies that I was a chief marketing officer for. It was so enlightening. So if that's some inspiration of how leaders may think about communicating and raising the issue, but tying it back to what the priorities and initiatives are, that may be a way to think about it.
That's a good one, Scott. Bob, your thoughts?
John, I found that one of the things that can help stimulate that sort of outcome that you were describing there is if you've got your organization set up and sort of your culture in some ways is defined as think small, act small, make no mistakes, move along, just, stay in your own little box, stay in your silo. It gets profoundly uninteresting very quickly. And we're all, caught up in these little tactical things. So I've always tried to help ensure that we sort of tear the lid off of things, let people see what's going on end to end, get their ideas when they're saying, hey, why are we doing it this way? We got these new tools that could change stuff, or we're being very cool in how we get to this outcome, but nobody gives a shit about the outcome. So with that big picture view of where everybody's trying to get to, and I think it unleashes in everybody more of a sense of here's how I can contribute, here's what I can do better. We're not working for my little silo here. We're working for the customer. We're working for the outside world. So whatever can be done to help enhance that, John, I think that's going to pay off in a big way.
Well, so I was having a conversation with a chief accounting officer, which you would normally not think of a chief accounting officer as somebody who is comfortable getting out of, they say, their swim lane, right? Because normally, the stereotype of a finance person is I'm, by the book and these are my things. that I'm focused on. We had a conversation about the crappiest term in business today being swim lanes, right? No, I got to stay in my swim lane. I got to stay in my swim lane. I said, listen, it looks kind of nice to get out of your swim lane and look around and see what the hell's going on everywhere else. And then to let everybody else know what your swim lane looks like. You get to learn about their swim lane. Hey, before you know it, maybe you're playing water polo. You're not playing, you're not
Amen.
swimming anymore. And so we had this really interesting conversation about it. I think it screams, Bob, to your point of ripping the lid off, because then it enables everybody to understand what those priorities mean within the context of all the other roles inside the business. To Scott's point, right? You can have your priority as just the chief accounting officer, and I'm going to march forward in my little thing here, or in this role, or in that role, or in that role. But if you decentralize that intelligence of what those priorities mean across the organization, you're playing water polo, you're not swimming, swimming a heat anymore. So I really like that point. Tony, I'm going to ask you to help bring us home here a little bit. And when you think about this activity versus progress sort of premise, some of these points that that we've all been sharing here, bring it home for us a bit.
Yeah, and John, if I can, let me use some recent and real-time experience that where I applied some of this stuff, learned a lot. Some worked, some didn't, and I think it kind of touches on a lot of the things that all three of you have said. When I came into thomasnet.com, it was a company that needed to be turned around. The company was over 120 years old, had a very defined culture. But something Bob just said of the focus for the customer was the first thing I noticed is they were in gridlock of endless meetings. I mean, unbelievable number of meetings in the course of a day. And it was the balance between small group meetings and one-on-ones. The one-on-ones was a big deal. I have the one-on-one with my boss and, all this kind of stuff. And the first thing I really started to think about is, hey, why don't we all start to get focused on customers and users? So let's prioritize our day around customers and users. And if I was in a meeting and somebody didn't bring up something about customers or users, I'd stop the meeting and kind of re-guide them. Then the other thing I did is I actually stopped one-on-ones from my position. And my comment to people, and people really got upset about this initially, because they were used to having one-on-one with a or the senior executive. And I said, Kendra, it's not that important that you and I work together. It's important that you work and collaborate with your peers, because that's how business gets done. So frankly, we're going to work together, and I hope we enjoy working with each other. But if you come and tell me something, then you're now putting me in the position where I have to cross-pollinate what you've said to the 10 or 12 people that you really need to be working with. And boy, did it take me, I'm not kidding, John, I bet you it took me a year before culturally people didn't take this as some sort of a game where I'm saying, I'm not spending time with this one, but I'm going to spend my time over here. Then the last thing I did, John, that was helpful is I said, I'm not going to be in group meetings that aren't large. The small group meeting wasn't that effective. So what I did is I set up 3 meetings during the course of a week. Monday morning, senior leadership team, every senior leader in the organization. And we'd spend 45 minutes, very fast paced. I want your top 2 or 3 priorities this week. Second thing I want to hear is who around this table needs to work with you to get those priorities done. Friday, we had the operations team. And these were people the next level down. And frankly, these are the
having
people
flashbacks, Tony. Yes,
yeah,
I remember this.
right?
This was good. It made you focus.
Right. And those are, Scotty, that's where the gears mesh. And then the third that we did, and boy, this really was great. This wasn't weekly, it was bi-weekly. We'd throw the doors open and everybody in the company would end up coming to these. It was ship it. What are we pushing live in the code of the platform? And the pride of ownership of the design, the development, but also you've got sales that's watching what's going to go live. You've got marketing that's watching. And suddenly my feeling like I had to do heavy lifting every day of calling the head of marketing, hey, have you seen the feature that's going to be coming up? No. When's that come? Well, okay. And, and I'm calling a group meeting suddenly, I shouldn't say suddenly. Over time, John, what happened is the next thing you know, it's sort of moving on its own. And again, I am digesting, by the way, over 5.5 years to get it to the point where it started moving on its own. I'll be really honest, it was probably 18 months to maybe even 24 months. I mean, it was not an easy process because for everybody that got a lot of value out of this, there was this weird cultural dynamic that had been set up that, hey, why isn't Tony spending one-on-one time with me? Or why is he saying one-on-one meetings don't matter? So it took a little while before, and I think just my last point, John, the long-winded way of saying, you gotta model this with your own behavior. And that's really what I worked hard at. It was easier, I'll be honest with you, when we were all in offices, but I had to model this myself and kind of walk the talk, as they say, right? And I think that helped a bit. But hopefully those are some kind of practical perspectives as we wrap this up.
Great thoughts. And folks, I hope everybody enjoyed this discussion. This is a weekly discussion that Tony, Scott, Bob, and myself are going to be having. The premise of this is that we swarm around big ideas. And we share perspective, share context, and share insights and experiences like we've all been doing right here, to decentralize some of these thoughts and ideas, as opposed to keep them centralized or keep them to ourselves. If you have ideas, if you have thoughts, if you have feedback for us, please share it. We'd love other ideas on ideas that we should be building growth swarms around. And Tony, Bob, Scotty, thanks so much for joining.
Welcome. I'm headed to
Thanks,
my next
John.
meeting, John.
Looking forward to it.
Bye, guys.